Voters in the 6th Congressional District are seeing a lot of familiar names on their primary ballot. Let's show you the new 6th District. This was approved by voters under Prop 50. This covers northern and eastern Sacramento County, including Roseville, Rockland, Citrus Heights, Orangevale, Fair Oaks, and parts of Sacramento and West Sacramento. The top two candidates from the June primary will advance to the general election in November. This is considered a battleground district for control of Congress, and some high-profile leaders are competing for the job. Congressman Kevin Kiley represents the 3rd Congressional District, and he has also served as a state assembly member. He was a Republican for most of his political career, but when the political maps were redrawn to favor Democrats, he changed his designation to no party preference. The other leading candidates are all Democrats. Martha Guerrero is the mayor of West Sacramento with experience as a licensed social worker and legislative advocate. Tin Ho is the Sacramento County District Attorney, best known for his role in bringing the Golden State Killer to justice. Dr. Richard Pan is a former state assemblyman and state senator with a background in pediatric medicine and public health. And Lauren Babb Tomlinson is the chief public affairs officer at Planned Parenthood Advocates Marmonte, who has chaired the California Commission on the Status of Women and Girls. We started with their plans to bring down the price of food.
I think that there's a lot we can do to try to make things better here. I think that the taxes that we have in California are too high as well. So I fought for increasing tax relief for Californians, which we successfully delivered by raising the state and local tax deduction. We've also managed to build new water infrastructure, or at least to get significant funding for that in California, which is going to make life a lot easier for our farmers.
Tariffs are driving up the cost of food, whether it's imported or makes it harder for our farmers to sell food. And then on top of that, now we're engaged in essentially an unconstitutional war that's driving up the cost of not only gasoline, but fertilizer and other things we need for farming. So, food costs, we can bring down food costs by not doing things to intentionally drive them up.
We need to make sure that we provide that safety net with making sure that SNAP benefits, the food stamps are there as a safety net for working families.
So SNAP was just cut under H.R. 1. Would you look to restore the funding, or what would you do as a member of Congress?
We would definitely restore the funding. People call it H.R. 1. People refer to other names. I call it the big bad billionaire bill, because we really need to really promote working families and cutting costs. So we need to restore the benefits when it comes to SNAP.
So what I find is eliminating the tariffs and eliminating the war from Iran, which is causing a big conflict with our gas prices. What we will see is significant gas price rates going up, and we will be able to stabilize. It'll take some time. And in addition to the CalFresh benefits, restoring those CalFresh and increasing the CalFresh benefits, because those benefits have been very low. And it's not been sufficient even for the older adults.
On day one, we've got to restore the cuts to SNAP, and then we also need to take a deeper dive on how they are making these decisions in grocery stores. So there's already a price accountability bill that I'm looking at that would make sure that we're not using AI to make sure that grocery prices are higher in communities of color, because quite frankly, everyone deserves to eat. And as a mom, I'm absolutely terrified about how many children and families are just struggling to put food on the table.
What do you think should happen with ICE? We hear everything from abolish ICE to give them more funding for the work that they do. And this has been so contentious that shut down part of the government. Where do you stand?
So first of all, I'm the only immigrant and refugee who's running for Congress in the 6th Congressional District. And so immigration is a very personal issue to me. What I see happening on the streets right now is illegal and inhumane. I'm an expert on Fourth Amendment law. And when ICE is going into homes on an administrative warrant signed by a bureaucrat, by an administrator, rather than a judicial warrant signed by a judge, that's illegal. It violates the Fourth Amendment. It violates the Constitution. I believe that we do need to secure our borders. And those here in the country who've committed violent crimes shouldn't be here. But we need to have comprehensive immigration reform, because 84% of the people in ICE detention right now have no prior criminal history.
I do want to be clear. I'm pro-public safety. And what I've experienced with ICE has been anything but making sure that we have public safety in our community. With the way they've been treating people and dragging people out of their vehicles by destroying their cars, pulling women from their hair to try to arrest them, I don't see that as a way of maintaining public safety. I see that as a terrorist activity. People are terrified today. What I find is a system that is not working, that has lost the public trust. The Department of Homeland Security has not done their part to maintain that. What we need to do is dismantle that department, dismantle ICE, and find a way to restore something that does protect our borders.
I am really terrified by what I'm seeing with ICE. I believe Donald Trump is using it as his personal army, and at this point we need to be abolishing ICE. We didn't have it in the early 2000s, and so we need to really adjust our resources and put it back in the hands where we can know that these departments are going to keep us safe. And we definitely need to make sure that we are not allowing folks that are causing crimes to stay in our country. But what we have seen is ICE is going after Americans. ICE is taking children away from their families, and that's not okay, and that's not something that I can sit with as a mom. And so we absolutely have to reform the system, and it can be done.
So you're saying abolish ICE and then what?
Abolish it and reform it in the sense that there are other departments that have better oversight and understanding about what we need to do.
In fact, we've had at least 2 Americans killed by ICE without accountability from the agency or having the people who are have to face the law, right? And so, frankly, I would say is that I think the challenge is that the culture in ICE, which is being greatly expanded by this administration, is broken.
So what's the solution?
Well, I think the solution it may be to close down the agency and if either take the functions of this agency and distribute to other ones, or else close it down and then basically create an agency that actually is responsive to the people, that actually follows the law and follows the Constitution.
To assure that we focus first and foremost on individuals who pose a risk of public safety, who are here illegally and have committed some sort of other crime. And then we also, I think, need to make some reforms to how immigration enforcement is conducted. So, for example, I've voted in favor of having a warrant requirement if you want to enter someone's home in some sort of immigration enforcement action. A judicial warrant if you want to enter someone's home. Thank you. Important clarification. I voted in favor of making sure that immigration operations don't occur near schools or child care centers. And I've actually proposed a number of additional reforms, having identification for ICE officers, that sort of thing, that I think would go a long way towards rebuilding public trust.
Also on the ballot for the 6th Congressional District, Republican Michael Stansfield and Democrat Tyler Vandenberg.